Hi, this is Doug from Dynamic Computing, and this is episode 15 of 10-Minute Amiga Retro Cast. This is all about Amiga OS 3.1.4, digging deeper. What I want to do is I want to delve a little more deeply into some of the features, some of the new enhancements that Amiga OS 3.1.4 has brought to the table by the kind folks who programmed it, and by Hyperion, who is distributing it. What it's done, it's really rewritten so many parts of the operating system and bug fixed so many parts of the operating system. Not necessarily making it appear brand new, but making it more stable, more reliable, and able to work with more of the hardware that's available today. Now, Amiga OS 3.9 already did a lot of that back in 2001 or so, whenever it came out, but the copyright holders, the license holders for that, haven't done anything with it in years, out of business, who knows where the code is. So we could either continue doing what we've been doing, which is using the latest version of the operating system from, going on 18 years ago, or move forward. And that's what Hyperion has decided to do by bringing on this group of people to help update it. Now, personally, on my machine, I'm using a fresh install of Amiga OS 3.1.4 with the utilities called BestWB for Best Workbench. I think that that is the optimal way to go for sleekness and speed and performance. I also do have an installation where I did OS 3.9 and upgraded 3.1.4 on top of that. I love it. It's worked perfect. It's on my IDE drive. But for this example, I don't want any of the 3.9 stuff getting in the way. I also have a new set of ROMs for my Amiga. On the last episode, I believe, I talked about how I was having serious issues booting to my SCSI devices, and I had to put IDE devices in there to even get it to run. Then it ran fine. Paul Renendez, the same gentleman who did my upgrade on my Warp Engine, sold me a set of 3.1.4 ROMs. Of course, I had to provide him with the receipt showing I'd actually purchased that from Hyperion. No piracy here. And for a very reasonable price, including shipping, I got the new ROMs, cranked them in there, boom, booted perfectly from SCSI. No issues, no complaints, not even a hiccup, just booted fast. Now, you'll see in a few minutes that there still does have to be a reboot involved when we boot the system. But that's okay. Let's get into some of the new stuff that it does. Okay, so one of the key and most important things that Amiga OS 3.1.4 did for us is provide integrated access to larger hard drives. Now again, OS 3.9 supported them just fine, but in a little different way. I was able to use hard drives that were up to 128 gigs for years on my OS 3.9 installation. This is bringing it to our 3.1.4 systems. No more 4 gigabyte limitations, even on the boot drive, as long as you have the ROMs. Now, if you're booting with the software-only version that does the soft update on the ROMs, I still think it's a good idea to keep your boot partition under 4 gigabytes. So when you first boot the Amiga, it will easily recognize that 4 gigabyte partition, and then you can have your work drive or whatever is, almost as big as you want, within, some rational size restrictions. Now, what they've done is they've upgraded HD Toolbox rather dramatically. Once it's recognized your hard drive, in this case I have a 74 gig SCSI drive on my Warp Engine, you can go in and you see a fairly familiar way of partitioning your drive. And you see I've got multiple partitions on mine. I am keeping a under 4 gig boot partition just because I've always used one. but I've got nice 8 gig partitions here, and I have a nice big 38 gig partition. All of these, at this point in time, I'm using them with fast file system simply because I want to see how it works, I want to see how reliable it is, and so far it's done a fine job, all things considered. Now, when you go in here and you click on Advanced Options, you're going to see an option that's normally unchecked for direct SCSI transfer. If you're using a third-party SCSI controller, oftentimes you need to check that in order for your drives to be recognized. If you're using the built-in IDE on your A1200 or your A4000, something like that, oftentimes you don't need to enable that. Okay, your mileage may vary. Now, another important thing that they've done here is provided long file name support. With this, file names go from a physical limitation of 30 characters all the way up to 106 characters for your file names, which is kind of nice. Now, I specifically don't have mine enabled because I originally had some problems with my Warp engine and enabling long file names. I had some booting issues. Those may be resolved now that I have the actual ROMs instead of the soft ROMs, but I have not tried it yet. I will experiment with it and see if it works now. One thing that is recommended by the makers of the software is if you have a large partition, especially on a CF card, to change your block size to a larger block size. Basically what AmigaOS has to do is it has to create a bitmap in memory of your hard drive and on boot up. And you're better off with a large file system block size on a CF card when it creates that bitmap. Saves memory, saves speed, and prevents wear and tear in the drive. Now, mine happens to be a block size of 512 kilobits, but you know, I could probably change that. I just have to reformat the drive. Max transfer, which is something we've had to deal with for decades, and it's always been a concern, a problem. What's the best max transfer? That's basically not how fast it can go, but how big of a collection of data can be transferred at one time. No longer a concern with most installations of AmigaOS 3.1.4. You don't even have to worry about it. Some devices, the guys say you will still need to set a max transfer, but they're not saying which ones or guaranteeing which ones because your mileage may vary. If you're using the onboard SCSI device, you don't have to mess with max transfer anymore, which is kind of cool. Now, the other thing that the new SCSI device does, the new controlling software that comes with it is it has a ATAPI support built in. Now, we've been able to use CD-ROMs on our Amigas for 15, 20 years now, easily, if not more. Probably more. But now the code, the ATAPI code, is built right into SCSI device, so it makes it easier and more efficient to use. Now, by default, HD Toolbox is only going to see devices that are on SCSI.device, your built-in IDE that's built into your Amiga, or if you're an Amiga 3000 user, your SCSI there. In order to get it to see other SCSI devices, you have to, of course, select your little guy here, go into Information, and change SCSI device name equals, and then the name of your particular device. Now, you probably had to do this when you installed the operating system to begin with off your install disks, because it would not have seen your devices if you're using a different device. Now, I experimented with also adding SCSI device there. It only sees the top one. Now, if I wanted to see the onboard IDE devices, which occasionally I have connected on here, I would have to delete this warp drive device and just have SCSI device, then it's going to see the onboard. On AmigaOS 3.9, it would see everything. It would see all my drives no matter how I had them connected. But this is working a little differently. Okay, on to the next major enhancement. Now, Intuition has been updated rather dramatically, but not by default. Okay, normally it's going to use Intuition version 4.0, which is a fairly traditional, slightly bug-fixed version where all your windows work normally. It includes a version of Intuition version 4.5 that supports off-screen dragging of windows. So like here, I can have my little window come over here, I can have my little window come over there, and that is surprisingly useful. When I go back and use regular Intuition version 4.0 for testing purposes, I feel like I'm locked in a little jail cell. You know, you can't move your window any further there, you can't move it any further there. When you're trying to copy and move things amongst your windows, it makes it so much faster and so much easier. Now, how do you enable this? Well, the instructions are on Hyperion's website in the FAQ, but basically what you do is you have to copy over an additional file. And I'll show you what we've got here. Your libs folder, you would by default have this, your regular Intuition library. There we are, right here. On your modules disk that came with your Amiga OS installation, there is a library called Intuition-v45.library. What you do is you rename your original Intuition library and then copy this file into your libs folder and rename it Intuition library. Now I have the unrenamed one there just as a reference, just so you can see what I'm talking about, but this is actually the version 4.5 of the library. Now, so that's step one, renaming your Intuition library. Step two is you have to do a little edit to your startup sequence. But if you open up your startup sequence, you're going to have a load module command with some extra code on the top. You want to get rid of the extra code and just have C:\load module. Now, if you are not using the actual physical ROMs, this is going to say ROM update here. That you're not going to have Intuition.library like I have. You're just going to have the word ROM update. Okay? And that is going to load the Intuition library. Now, in theory, this is supposed to work when you have the ROMs too. But every time I use ROM update, when I have the ROMs installed, I get an error on boot up. But I find if I go in and say, okay, look in libs, load Intuition library, boom, done, works great. All right, this is going to cause a reboot on initial startup from a power on situation, because it has to basically update that, and then it has to reboot the machine so the update takes place. So even if you have the physical ROMs, if you're going to use that new Intuition library, it's going to cause a reboot. Now, the other issue with this is if you are using retargetable graphics like I'm using, it works great with the Picasso 96 drivers for retargetable graphics. It does not work with the CyberGrafx retargetable graphics program. So that is the main reason they did not code this into the operating system just as default. It just doesn't work with the CyberGrafx. Now, if you have a CyberGrafx card like I do, I've got a CyberGrafx 64 3D, works perfect as long as you're using the Picasso 96 drivers. If I were to use the CyberGrafx retargetable graphics, it would fail. So that's why they have it as an optional thing. But if you're using AGA or ECS or OCS, or you're using Picasso 96, use this. It makes such a huge difference being able to just drag things around and not being physically limited. You know, you can't move things. It's wonderful. Now, they made a lot of changes to the exec kernel, which basically is the core of the Amiga. With the ROMs installed, 060 upgrades like I use, which is the 040 to 060 upgrade chip, which I recommend to everybody whose system can support it, boots like a champ without having to have a custom ROM. Now, you still need the 040 and the 060 libraries, which are very important. So I've got the 040 library in here from when this was an 040 machine. and the 060 library down here. You still need those libraries in order for it to work. If you don't have the libraries in there, it's not going to boot properly. Now, things like the graphics library have been enhanced, and it used to be graphics library used to have a version for OCS and ECS machines and a separate version for AGA machines. They've all been unified into one graphics library to make things smoother, and a bunch of bug fixes and speed ups, so window movement, things like that is faster. And also chunky to planar routines. Now that's, Amiga uses chunky graphics. Planar graphics are more what like a VGA card would use. And that's the conversion between chunky and planar, rewritten from scratch, and they're about twice as fast. Now, what I want to test is in standard AGA mode, is Doom faster now, because there's a lot of chunky to planar going on with playing Doom on the Amiga. Now here we've got data types are very much enhanced, much more similar to what we had with Amiga OS 3.9. Let me hide all this stuff. I should just do the key commands. Data types. So your data types like sound files, 8SVX, anim files, PNG files, WAV files, all of those have been enhanced and work much better now. A good example is the 8SVX is now in stereo instead of mono. So when you're clicking on something and it uses a data type, it works better, it works more efficiently now, which is always nice. Now, here's something that's just a little bit more complicated, but actually kind of cool. If we go into the shell, which of course the shell's been enhanced. Now, my shell, just so you know, I'm using a Vinced on here, which comes along with BestWB. But even the shell that comes included with Amiga OS 3.14 is very nice and very enhanced. One thing that they enhanced on here is they integrated pipes directly into the CLI here. Okay. Now pipes are something where you can redirect information from a command into something else. So for example, we do a list, we do a pipe, which is just the straight up key, just that straight line that's just to the right of the plus key on my American keyboard. We pipe that to more. What it does is it does a regular list, but it's sending it to the more program, which is, of course, the program, the integrated program that's used that allows you to step through things very easily. So here's a good example of that. We're going to list all, which normally would just keep going and going forever and ever and ever. But if list all pipe to more, what that's going to do is that's going to show you the first bit of information, and then more takes over and says, okay, hit the spacebar for the next, hit the spacebar for the next. So much easier than trying to stop a listing. If you're doing a huge directory listing, looking for something, just pipe it to more, and it gives you extra capabilities. All right. Now, here's another cool feature that they've added. You can combine two commands together now. So we all know what avail does. It shows you how much memory is in use, and you all know what info does. It shows you your disk space. What if we could do that all in one command? So avail, two pipes, info, puts the two of them together. Immediately shows you both. Now I don't know about you guys, but I personally use these all the time when I'm looking at how much chip RAM is used and things like that. Now, what if you want to take the entire listing of your hard drive and bring it into a file that you can then, look at if you, or print out, do whatever you want to do with it. Now, Best Workbench comes with a great program called TextView that works fantastic with pipe. So watch this. We're going to list all pipe text view. Now, this is only going to work if you have Best Workbench installed. Okay, so now it's done. Now I can actually just use the mouse, scroll down, That's the entire contents of my Workbench drive, all dumped into a text file. Now, one would assume you could just dump it into something like ed or something like that, but it just doesn't seem to work with the pipe commands. I tried it, it just doesn't seem to work. But this worked perfect. Now from here, we can save it, and now we call it, let's see, let's put it in our data drive, docs, documents, and we're going to call it workbench dump.txt. Okay, now I've just saved my entire contents of my directory listing for Workbench into a file on my computer. Really kind of a cool thing that you can do. All right, now our Amiga clipboard has been enhanced. It used to be when you would copy and paste text from anything. Let's open file, S, startup sequence. So if we were to copy some text here, it would normally save that to RAM. It does not default to RAM anymore. So if you're low on space, you're not going to get an out of memory error if you're copying and pasting things, which is kind of nice. And there's some more features that they've enhanced the clipboard with, so hopefully it'll work better. Now, I understand one of the biggest things that they've accomplished on here is with the actual printer drivers and the printing subsystem for the Amiga. Now, they've redone it just about from scratch. It was based on ancient code, probably from the late 80s, and even with OS 2.0 and then 3.0 and 3.1, it was not enhanced that much. So they've redone printer support rather dramatically. They've added lots of new printers, and just about everything will emulate LaserJet 3. Now, it makes printing faster, it makes it more reliable, it makes it just all around slicker. And the Best Workbench also adds tons more printer drivers on it. I don't have those loaded on here, but it adds a bunch of new ones. So printing support is absolutely improved. So a lot of what was done in Amiga OS 3.1.4 were serious bug fixes, bugs that have been there for decades and not been touched, speed enhancements, and quality of life improvements, big hard drives, better usage of our video displays, faster video, better quality control with the actual commands. Some of the Amiga OS commands, the CLI commands, were written in ancient languages like B, which is a predecessor to C. So many of those have been upgraded, done correctly, written correctly, fixed and patched to make it a more stable operating system, and also to make it a better platform to then update in the future. Now, the best update that I've found so far, that personally I've found, is called Best Workbench. I'll put the link right down here. It is designed with Amiga OS 3.1.4 in mind, and it's a suite of utilities and add-ons that improve your Amiga experience without bogging it down. It's not going to be big toolbars and big fancy graphics and things like that to bog it down. Just nice, slick utilities. I've shown you a few on here, like the editing program I use, which is Reddit. Fantastic replacement for the editing utility that came with Amiga OS 3.9. I like it just fine, super fast. I find myself using a good dozen of these Best Workbench utilities. So next episode, I'm going to cover the best of the Best Workbench utilities on there. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned a little something about the core of Amiga OS 3.1.4. If I've made any mistakes, put them down there in the comments. I'm happy to listen to them. And thank you very much. This is Doug from 10-Minute Amiga Retro Cast, signing out.